This is the story of how one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors and his wife were killed in their own home by their son, and why a medication change 1 month before may explain everything. Rob Reiner, the legendary filmmaker behind When Harry Met Sally and The Princess Bride, along with his wife Michelle, were found stabbed to death in their Brentwood home on December 14, 2025, and their 32-year-old son Nick now faces 2 counts of first-degree murder. New details about his mental health treatment reveal a tragic chain of events that nobody saw coming. Before we go any further, Nick Reiner has been charged but not convicted. He's entitled to the presumption of innocence, and this is still an active legal case. What we've learned about the month leading up to that night paints a devastating picture of mental illness, medication changes gone wrong, and a family that tried everything to save their son. Who was Rob Reiner? To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, you need to know who Rob Reiner was. Between 1984 and 1992, Rob Reiner had what's often called one of the greatest directing streaks in Hollywood history: 8 consecutive films that either became classics or cultural phenomena. This is Spinal Tap in 1984 basically invented the mockumentary genre. Stand By Me followed 2 years later as one of the greatest coming-of-age films ever made. The Princess Bride came next in 1987, modest at first, but eventually becoming a massive cult classic that defined a generation. When Harry Met Sally arrived in 1989 and redefined the modern romantic comedy entirely. That famous scene at Katz's Deli featured his mother Estelle Reiner delivering the line, "I'll have what she's having." And the film pulled in nearly $93 million at the box office before being selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. Misery in 1990 gave Kathy Bates an Academy Award. And then A Few Good Men in 1992 brought us You Can't Handle the Truth, while earning a Best Picture nomination and becoming the most commercially successful film of his entire career. Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson starred in that courtroom drama that remains iconic to this day. Rob wasn't just a director, though. The son of comedy legend Carl Reiner, he won 2 Emmy Awards playing Meathead on All in the Family before his directing career even started. Castle Rock Entertainment came from him and his partners in 1987. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame followed, and at 78 years old, he just completed Spinal Tap 2, a sequel to the movie that launched everything. Michelle was 70, a photographer and producer Rob met during the production of When Harry Met Sally. Meeting her actually changed his mind about the film's ending, because he originally planned to have Harry and Sally not end up together, but falling in love with Michelle made him reconsider. They married in 1989 and had 3 children together: Jake, Nick, and Romy. Nick's long battle with addiction. Nick Reiner's story with substance abuse started devastatingly young. First rehab at age 15, around 2008, and by the time he turned 18, he'd already cycled through 9 different treatment facilities. That number reached 17 or 18 rehab stays total by age 22, with heroin, cocaine, and OxyContin as his drugs of choice. A 2016 interview with People magazine had Nick opening up about just how bad things got. "I was homeless in Maine. I was homeless in New Jersey. I was homeless in Texas. I spent nights on the street. I spent weeks on the street. It was not fun." Those were his words. The homelessness happened because of conflicts with his family over treatment, and Nick explained it this way: "If I wanted to do it my way and not go to the programs they were suggesting, then I had to be homeless." On a 2018 podcast called Dopey, Nick described a relapse that involved linking up with old dealer and hanging out with him for like 3 weeks doing heroin. Though he also reflected that made me who I am now, having to deal with that stuff. Around age 27, sometime in 2017, the addiction took a near-fatal turn when Nick suffered what he called a cocaine heart attack after a relapse. This wasn't teenage experimentation gone wrong anymore. This was a life-threatening chronic struggle that lasted nearly 2 decades. Being Charlie, Art from Pain. Something remarkable happened in 2015 when Nick co-wrote a semi-autobiographical screenplay with Matt Elisifon, someone he met in rehab. Being Charlie was the title, and Rob Reiner directed it. The film tells the story of a drug-addicted son of an actor-turned-politician, written longhand by Nick in a treatment center when computer access was limited. "It's not my life, but I went to a lot of these places, so I had a lot of these stories," Nick said later. Rob called it the most personal thing I've ever done. And the film ended up winning the SAMHSA Voice Award, which recognizes accurate portrayals of behavioral health issues. But here's what's heartbreaking about all of this. Rob's concern about addiction wasn't just about his son. He was reportedly haunted by River Phoenix's drug death after they worked together on Stand By Me. That loss stayed with him, and now he was watching his own son go through the same battle. Alan Horn, a family friend, said Michelle told him a few years ago, "We've tried everything. We don't know what else to do." Rob captured the impossible position parents of addicts find themselves in during a 2016 interview when he said, "I'd rather you hate me than you be dead in the street." The dual diagnosis. Addiction wasn't the whole story, though. Somewhere around 2020, Nick was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a serious mental illness that combines symptoms of schizophrenia like hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking with mood disorder symptoms like mania and severe depression. Psychologists at Northeastern University point out that people with conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder use substances at higher rates than the general population. The problem is that substance abuse can actually delay the diagnosis of underlying mental illness, and mental health conditions like schizophrenia often don't show up until someone's late teens or 20s, which means families may spend years focusing on addiction before realizing there's something deeper going on. Approximately 21.5 million adults in the United States have what's called a co-occurring disorder, meaning they have both a mental health condition and a substance abuse problem at the same time. These need to be treated together for the best outcomes according to experts. But 17 years ago, when Nick first entered rehab at age 15, mental health and addiction treatment were in what experts call separate silos. Nick was under the care of a psychiatrist and attended a Los Angeles-based rehab facility that specialized in both mental health and substance abuse. $70,000 per month was the cost, described by TMZ as the kind of facility where rich, powerful parents send their troubled kids. And here's what's absolutely critical to understanding what happened next. Sources told TMZ that Nick was stable on his medications for schizoaffective disorder, but then about 1 month before the murders, around November 2025, his doctors changed his medications. The medication change. Everything goes wrong at this point. After the medication change, Nick's behavior became erratic and dangerous, according to multiple sources. One source told TMZ directly, Nick was out of his head after the medication switch. His doctors were trying to adjust the medications to stabilize him, but according to sources, it wasn't working. Before the change, Nick had reportedly been stable, and after the change, something fundamental shifted in his mental state. Barry Markowitz, a cinematographer who worked on Being Charlie and counted himself as a family friend, saw Nick just 10 days before the murders. Nick was on the upswing, looked like a GQ model, Markowitz said. Other sources noted that in recent months, Rob and Michelle were struggling with how to deal with Nick's continued mental health issues and alleged substance abuse. There's a disturbing piece of history that suggests Nick's mental health challenges went back further than his diagnosis. The New York Post, citing a family friend, reported that Nick had severe outbursts at age 11 that required him to be restrained in what they called bear hugs. That 2018 podcast also had Nick describing getting totally spun out on uppers and going 10 rounds with my guest house, destroying a TV, lamp, and everything in the guest house. Nick was living in the guest house on his parents' Brentwood property at this time. Despite the living arrangement, the family was still close with regular dinners together, watching basketball or news together, trying to maintain normalcy while managing an incredibly difficult situation. The Christmas party. Saturday evening, December 13th, 2025, Rob, Michelle, and Nick attended a holiday party at Conan O'Brien's home in West Los Angeles. A-list guests including Bill Hader, Jane Fonda, and various industry executives filled the room for this end-of-year celebration. Rolling Stone reported that Rob and Michelle actually asked if they could bring Nick specifically to keep an eye on him. What happened at that party is where accounts start to vary, but multiple sources paint a disturbing picture. Nick wore a hoodie to what was apparently a formal event where everyone else showed up in suits and dresses. Witnesses said he appeared tweaked out and erratic, interrupting conversations including one with Bill Hader, asking guests repeatedly if they were famous, and just standing there staring at people. Then, according to multiple sources, Nick got into a very loud argument, with his father Rob. Conflicting reports exist, though, because one executive who attended said that Conan O'Brien saw no fight, though the executive confirmed Nick was walking around making people feel uncomfortable. What's clear is that Rob and Michelle left the party early. Multiple sources said they appeared mortified and embarrassed. And this was a couple who had spent decades in Hollywood circles, who were comfortable at industry events, leaving early because of their son's behavior. December 14th, the timeline. Based on prosecutors' statements and various reports, the murders occurred in the early morning hours of December 14th, somewhere around 3 to 4 a.m. Rob and Michelle were found in their master bedroom, killed by what the medical examiner later confirmed as multiple sharp force injuries, which means stab wounds from a knife. Around 4 to 4:15 that morning, Nick Reiner checked into the Pierside Santa Monica Hotel using his own credit card, booking room 207 for one night. Witnesses at the hotel said he appeared tweaked out, but here's the critical detail: no visible blood or injuries on him. Video footage shows him walking to the hotel around 4 a.m. wearing a black backpack and hat. Later that Sunday morning, before the bodies were even discovered, hotel housekeeping entered Nick's room and found something disturbing. The shower was full of blood. There was blood on the bed sheets, and the window was covered with bed sheets. Nick never checked out. A masseuse arrived at the Reiner home around 2 p.m. that afternoon for an appointment, and nobody answered the door. Then at approximately 3:30 to 3:40 p.m., their daughter Romy, who's 28 years old, discovered her parents' bodies in the master bedroom and called 911. Surveillance footage captured Nick around 9 p.m. that evening at an Arco gas station near USC, buying Gatorade while wearing a green jacket, jeans, a baseball cap, and carrying a red backpack. Just 15 minutes later at 9:15 p.m., police arrested Nick near USC in the Exposition Park area, about 15 miles from the crime scene. Surveillance video shows police vehicles surrounding him at a crosswalk where he raised his hands and did not resist arrest. The hotel evidence. The hotel room becomes absolutely critical to understanding what happened. December 16th, around 1 a.m. in the morning, 2 days after the murders, an LAPD robbery-homicide detective arrived at the Pierside Hotel. According to TMZ, the detective told the front desk he was doing a welfare check on Nick Reiner and said he was concerned Nick had disposed of a weapon and evidence, believing Nick had cleaned up and disposed of evidence in the room. But here's the problem with all of that. By the time the detective searched room 207, housekeeping had already cleaned it, and according to TMZ sources, no search warrant was presented. This could become a significant legal issue because any evidence found in that room might be challenged by the defense. What the hotel evidence suggests is that Nick may have used the room to wash off blood immediately after the murders, which would explain why witnesses said he appeared clean when checking in with no visible blood. The blood would have been under his clothes or on his skin, and he then showered at the hotel, leaving blood in the shower and on the bed sheets. The charges and legal proceedings. December 16th brought formal charges from Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman. 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances of multiple murders, plus a weapon enhancement for personal use of a knife. First-degree murder means premeditated killing, and the special circumstance of multiple murders combined with the weapon enhancement means Nick could face life without parole or potentially the death penalty, though Hochman hasn't decided whether to seek it. Nick made his first court appearance on December 17th wearing a blue anti-suicide smock, what they call a suicide prevention vest, and shackles. He didn't enter a plea and waived his right to a speedy arraignment, which was postponed to January 7th, 2026. The medical examiner's report was released that same day, confirming the cause of death as multiple sharp force injuries. 2 days after the arrest on December 16th, Nick's family hired Alan Jackson, a former LA County prosecutor considered one of California's top 100 lawyers who'd represented high-profile clients, including Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey. Jackson's initial statement called the case a devastating tragedy and said proceedings would be very complex, asking people to not make a rush to judgment. But then something unexpected happened at the January 7th hearing. The attorney withdrawal. January 7th, 2026. When Nick was supposed to be arraigned, Alan Jackson withdrew from the case. He told the court he had no choice but to step down and said that circumstances beyond his and Reiner's control made it impossible to continue representing Nick. A protective order prevented Jackson from legally explaining what those circumstances were. Jackson did make one powerful statement, though. "We've investigated this matter top to bottom, back to front. What we've learned, and you can take this to the bank, is that pursuant to the law of this state, pursuant to the law in California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder." He clarified that his team had devoted literally every waking hour for 3 weeks investigating the case. And this is significant because Jackson isn't saying Nick didn't kill his parents. He's saying that under California law, Nick is not guilty of murder, and that's the language of an insanity defense. Nick appeared at that hearing in a brown jail jumpsuit with a shaved head, and his only words were, "Yes, I agree, Your Honor," when asked about waiving his right to a speedy trial. Public defender Kimberly Green took over the case, and the arraignment was rescheduled to February 23, 2026. Why the murder really happened, the insanity defense. So here's what we're really talking about here. This case is almost certainly going to hinge on an insanity defense centered around medication-induced psychosis, and that medication change 1 month before the murders is going to be absolutely critical. California law says that to prove insanity, the defense doesn't need to show that Nick didn't know right from wrong. They need to show that he didn't understand the nature and quality of his act, which is a lower bar than many people realize, though juries still set what legal experts call a very high bar for insanity defenses because they rarely succeed. Here's what the defense will likely argue. Nick had a documented diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder and was stable on his medications when his doctors changed those medications about a month before the murders. After that change, his behavior became what sources described as erratic and dangerous, and he was out of his head, and the doctors were trying to adjust the medications, but it wasn't working. Then, while in what could be argued was a psychotic state, he killed his parents. The prosecution will have to contend with some challenging facts, though. There's the medication change documented right before the behavioral changes, expert testimony about what schizoaffective disorder does to someone's perception of reality, and the long documented history of mental illness, including those outbursts at age 11 that required physical restraint. But the prosecution also has some strong evidence on their side. Nick checked into a hotel after the murders using his own credit card, showered to wash off blood, stayed at the hotel for hours, and was caught on camera buying Gatorade at a gas station 15 miles from the crime scene. These actions suggest some level of planning and awareness, the ability to make decisions and take steps to avoid immediate detection. There's also the timeline from the party to consider. Even if accounts vary about how severe the argument was, Nick was clearly agitated and behaving strangely, and then hours later his parents are dead. The prosecution will argue that suggests motive and intent, not a sudden psychotic break. Deputy District Attorney Habib Balian is handling the case, the same prosecutor who worked on the Menendez brothers' re-sentencing attempt and the Robert Durst trial. So he knows how to handle complex, high-profile cases with mental health components. DA Nathan Hochman said, "If there is evidence of mental illness, it will be presented in court, leaving the door open but also not conceding the defense's position." And there's one more thing that's going to complicate everything here. On December 20th, a judge signed a sealed medical order, and we don't know what's in it, but it's possibly related to Nick's mental health treatment. Those sealed psychiatric records are going to be fought over in court because they could be the key to everything. The family's response. Jake and Romy Reiner, Nick's siblings, released a joint statement on December 17th. Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing every moment of the day. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, is something that no one should ever experience. They weren't just our parents, they were our best friends. They asked for respect and privacy, and for speculation to be tempered with compassion and humanity. After Alan Jackson withdrew on January 7th, they released another statement saying they have the utmost trust in the legal process and will not comment further on matters related to the legal proceedings. Think about what Romy and Jake are going through right now. Romy found her parents' bodies. Both of them lost their mother and father in the most violent, traumatic way possible. And their brother, their sibling who they grew up with, who they've watched struggle for nearly 2 decades, is charged with killing them. There's no winner in this story, no justice that brings Rob and Michelle back, no outcome that doesn't leave this family shattered. The bigger picture. This case highlights something we don't talk about enough, which is the intersection of mental illness, substance abuse, and medication management. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, reports that approximately 21.5 million adults in the United States have co-occurring disorders, which means 21.5 million people dealing with both mental health conditions and substance abuse problems at the same time. When Nick first entered rehab at age 15 in 2008, mental health and addiction treatment were in separate systems. But we now know these conditions need to be treated together. We also know that mental health conditions like schizophrenia often don't manifest until late teens or 20s, which means families may spend years focusing on addiction before realizing there's an underlying mental illness. And here's something else that matters. Changing psychiatric medications is not a simple process. And for someone with schizoaffective disorder, finding the right medication combination can take months or even years. When medications are changed, there can be a transition period where the person is less stable than they were before, because sometimes medications stop working and need to be changed. Sometimes side effects become unbearable. Sometimes doctors are trying to find a better combination. But during those transitions, someone can become a danger to themselves or others. And that's what sources are suggesting happened with Nick, that the medication change destabilized him at the exact wrong time. Where things stand now. As of January 13th, 2026, right now, Nick Reiner is being held without bail at the Twin Towers Correctional Facility in downtown Los Angeles. His next scheduled court date is February 23rd, 2026, when he's supposed to be arraigned, and at that hearing he'll enter a plea, likely not guilty by reason of insanity. After that, there will be a preliminary hearing where a judge decides if there's enough evidence to go to trial, followed by months, possibly years, of legal proceedings with mental health evaluations, expert testimony, fights over what evidence can be admitted, and potential plea negotiations. The district attorney still hasn't decided whether to seek the death penalty, though that seems unlikely given the mental health circumstances. Meanwhile, the entertainment industry is mourning the loss of a legend. Jane Fonda posted on Instagram, "I saw them night before last looking healthy and happy. I am reeling with grief, stunned." Michelle Obama revealed on Jimmy Kimmel Live that she and Barack Obama were supposed to see Rob and Michelle on the day their bodies were found. Spinal Tap 2 is now Rob Reiner's final work. The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me, A Few Good Men, all these films that have been quoted and beloved for decades. They're now the legacy of a man who died in one of the most tragic ways imaginable. Conclusion. This is the story of how a medication change 1 month before December 14th may have set off a chain of events that ended in unspeakable tragedy. A family that tried everything, 17 or 18 rehab stays, a $70,000 per month treatment facility, bringing their son to a party to keep an eye on him, creating a semi-autobiographical film to process the pain, and it still wasn't enough. A young man who battled heroin addiction from age 15, who was homeless on the streets, who suffered a cocaine heart attack, and who was diagnosed with a severe mental illness that combines the worst aspects of schizophrenia and mood disorders. And the reason why, under California law, Nick Reiner's attorney believed he investigated the case, top to bottom, back to front, and concluded that Nick is not guilty of murder, even though by all accounts Nick killed his parents. The question isn't whether Nick Reiner caused his parents' deaths anymore. The question is whether in the eyes of the law he understood what he was doing when it happened, whether the medication change pushed him into a psychotic state where he couldn't grasp the nature and quality of his actions, whether he was legally insane. That's what this trial is going to determine, and whatever the outcome, it won't bring Rob and Michelle Reiner back, won't undo the trauma their daughter Romy experienced finding their bodies, won't give Jake and Romy their best friends back. All we're left with is a devastating reminder that mental illness and addiction don't discriminate. They don't care if you're the son of a Hollywood legend, don't care if your family has resources and money and access to the best treatment available, don't care if your father made some of the most beloved films in cinema history. Sometimes despite everyone's best efforts, tragedy happens anyway. And sometimes the person who causes that tragedy is himself a victim of the illness that destroyed his mind. The next court date is February 23rd, and we'll be following this case as it develops. This is a tragedy that touches on mental health, addiction, medication management, family dynamics, and the criminal justice system, and there are no easy answers to any of it.